Phoebe Barnard and John Bowey are initiators, creators and producers of The Climate Restorers, a show that is airing on EarthX. Welcome Phoebe, welcome John.
Thank you.
Phoebe, a scientist, John, a filmmaker. Phoebe the wife, John the husband. If you bring all that together, what happens?
Magic happens, Jurriaan, of course. We were very lucky, to be honest, because we met each other and of course there was chemistry, but we also realized that there was a great commonality of values and of approaches to the world, that we both recognized that humanity is a complex species and the world is a complex, messy place. And exploring that is a good way to understand how to make the world a better place, how to improve our relationships with people and the planet.
I think so. I mean, our early conversations during the courting process, if you will, were about values. You know, what interests you, what motivates you, what are you concerned about, and how are you addressing that? And I was doing that in other areas, other social issues and documentaries and talk shows and stuff. And Phoebe was doing it through her science, so we saw a natural collaboration.
Get together, but I would say that the scientist tends to dig deep and wants to know the details, and the filmmaker is a storyteller and doesn't always need the details.
Do you know, Jurriaan, John is actually the better scientist than I, because he's able to go down deep into physics in a level that I never would. I'm a global change scientist, so I am dealing with the big picture and systems thinking. So I look to see what's missing and what's needed and how we can get humanity from A to B. So it works actually pretty well, I think.
The Climate Restorers, what drove you to produce that show?
It was a chain of events. Phoebe was working with a gentleman known as Peter Fakowski. He was involved in an organization that Phoebe was setting up. And he was just in the process of launching a book that he'd written, Climate Restoration. And we ended up having dinner together, and he'd been speaking to some people about the possibility of making a short film about it. We spoke about it, and we had a lot of commonality, and we moved forward. The challenge is, though, that we've seen a lot of really good climate documentaries, but they're very, very dense. An hour and a half of, the films like Leonardo DiCaprio's produced. But for me anyway, there was an evaporation process. It was great, it was amazing, and then sharing that information with somebody else, it's already starting to evaporate. Trying to remember the salient points of that. So we decided to turn one short film into 4 one-hour films. Separating the subjects, and it turned into a long journey.
But I think it's a very different kind of film, and I want to make this clear. I think we embarked upon the process of making a documentary series, not just about here's the problem, the climate change, horrible, bad, downhill slope. We felt humanity needs agency right now, and we don't need to hear so much more about what's wrong. We need to have a vision of what could possibly go right. And so building up a narrative of humanity being at this crossroads of our civilization, and I think it's now pretty clear to most people that we are in a system which is cracking and forming something else, that a lot of people don't know what is possible other than increasing dysfunction. And we see a lot of dysfunction in our societies. So we set about making a series of films that would explore in a very dispassionate way, but also an educational and in entertaining way, what we might be able to do to chart a future that works better for humanity, works better for all life on Earth, where life can thrive again. And that requires stabilizing the climate, and by extension, stabilizing the planet and stabilizing our society. If we look in history, and John's really the history buff, we see that whenever there's a big volcanic eruption, there tends to be unrest and economic collapse and the fall of governments, and we don't want to keep repeating those issues.
I think also we were and I think we need to give a broader context here. The book that Peter had written, Climate Restoration, was about removing the carbon that's already in the atmosphere that's been building up over 200 years. And so we were then in the realms of talking about doing as opposed to the realm of don't do. And that was a significant shift. Whoop, there goes my hearing aid. That was a significant...
Just go back one sentence.
Yeah.
I just want to give a broader context because the book that Peter had written, which set this process in motion, was about climate restoration. In other words, the removal of historic carbon that's building up. Because even if we reach net zero in 2050 or whenever, it's nowhere near enough to stop the trajectory that we're on. So the book, it was exploring ways that it might be possible to accelerate what nature's doing. So it's not geoengineering, it's supporting nature doing what it's doing. And so that gave us a significant advantage, I think, because so many climate films are prescriptive, they're finger pointing, and you mustn't do that. And people don't respond to that. And at the end of the day, this 20% science and 80% people's will to do what we need to do.
Now the challenge, of course, with such a solution as Fakowski's solution is, I can't do that. He has to do it, or others. I mean, it's not something you can do at home, right? In that sense,
Yeah.
it's still a little bit far away.
Well, there is a caveat to that, because two of the episodes, one is methane oxidation, which is an amazing subject. Our challenge there was to kind of be true to the principles of it and make people understand what the basic principle is. They don't need to understand the science. The science is there, but they don't need to understand that. The work on blue carbon in the ocean in terms of ocean iron fertilization and restocking the ocean with a sufficient amount of iron to promote growth, to suck down carbon through photosynthesis, blah, blah, blah. People aren't going to start doing that in their ponds in the back garden or their swimming pool because it's not going to work. But the third episode on the built environment looks at going back to using more traditional construction methods that are carbon neutral or even carbon negative. And there's a lot of things that people can do to get involved in that. And the fourth episode basically looks at ecosystem restoration, because while all this research is going on, at the end of the day, nature's still the biggest game in town. But nature's in trouble. Nature's drawing down 43% of the carbon that's going up into the atmosphere every year. It's leaving a deficit of 16.7 billion tons of carbon. We're talking about direct air capture systems that might pull down 500,000 tons when it works to capacity. The ocean offers a lot of possibilities, but collaboratively, all of these things together have possibilities. And so what we're trying to do with the film is get that message out that this is what people are doing.
So, Phoebe, climate restorers is of course a positive term. Restoring is good, right?
We want to repair.
Yes, we want to repair. But it is also true that there are people who, at the starting point, don't even think there's climate change. We're here, we're in Texas. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
So, how do they respond to climate restorers as a term to start with?
I think one of our fundamental efforts with this film has really been to try to make it a unifying message that anyone can get around. And yes, we do use the word climate, and I guess there are people that won't even do that. We're not going to worry about them because events are overtaking us as humanity, and I think people will start to see with their eyes, if they haven't already, how destabilized the climate has become. But our effort was really to try and defuse this very polarized and polarizing narrative of the binary nature of our society in the USA, but also increasingly around the globe, that you're either this or you're that, you're a Republican or a Democrat. And the world shouldn't be that way. As Bill as one of the speakers upstairs was saying in the climate restoration session this morning, our systems have been developing to drive division amongst us. We cannot afford that. We need to take back the narrative from this. And so the 4 films of the Climate Restorers series are an attempt to do that. Fundamentally, we have too much CO2 in the atmosphere, and we have too much methane. And methane is a very potent gas. It can be up to 86 times more potent than CO2. So it's the thing we need to do first. It's like the low-hanging fruit. How do we oxidize it? How do we get it out of the atmosphere? But also, how do we stop warming the planet fast enough so that ecosystems aren't degrading and releasing natural methane from the permafrost and so on? So we have, I often say, a very short road and a very short amount of time to walk. And we need to regard this as a global change grand challenge for humanity. The road is short, the hill is steep. The odds may sometimes seem to be quite long that we can actually pull back humanity and a destabilizing climate from the brink.
But isn't that the challenge? I mean, hard journeys, yes, humanity is good at that and has been forced to be on hard journeys, but nobody chooses a hard journey. So how can we make this fun for people, John? How do you do that?
We do have a bit of secret sauce.
Good. I like secret sauces.
And that is that some of the projects that we covered in the Caribbean, in the Philippines, working with things like sargassum, which is a free-floating seaweed, that's being converted, beneficiated into emulsifiers, into vegan leathers and stuff. So all of a sudden, there's the business of saving the climate. It's not the business of lobbying to get people to change their behavior. And the business of saving the climate is a growing business. And the ocean is one of our biggest bets. I mean, it's the thing that draws down the most. It's the best absorber of heat that we have on the planet, and it offers so many possibilities. And that's one of the things that we cover. And I think that's the key, because how do you get people to respond to something that's outside their immediate experience?
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
So we're going to close our conversation, but I'm going to give you both 1 minute. And in that minute, you need to tell me, and of course the audience, why you think we're winning this big battle that we're in. So Phoebe, I'll start with you.
I don't think we're winning it yet. And that's because most people aren't engaged in this, but can be. And it needs a widespread narrative that helps draw people in to a culture, I would almost say a civilization, of repair of the climate, the planet, and our societies to a regenerative one rather than an extractive, profiteering one. And it's not to say that we cannot make the world work in terms of profit, but we cannot solve this with the same mindset that we came into the problem with.
I'll try it again. Why are we winning, John?
I think it's a battle. We're partway through the battle, not even the war. We're partway through this particular battle. But there is opportunity, and people respond better to opportunity. And there are catastrophes, and some catastrophes have a silver lining in that they draw people's attention to something that was outside their experience. And I'm an optimist.
Thank you. Thank you, Phoebe.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Phoebe.
Okay, thanks.
And thank you, audiences.
Thanks.